Batman is the kind of movie that makes me have high hopes for, and yet it managed to surpass all of my expectations. And it's with great pleasure that I say that I simply love the Batman from start to finish. The more I think about the Batman, the better it gets. Basically, everything in this movie works. And I would like to start this review by talking about what amazed me the most in this film, Robert Pattinson. Robert Pattinson's performance was amazing, both as Bruce Wayne and as Batman. And none of the previous versions of Batman I've seen before made me relate to this character so much as this one. I think this movie and Robert Pattinson's acting did a great job in fleshing out this version of Batman. He hasn't been the Batman for too long by the time the story begins, and criminality is still on the rise despite his efforts. But all that increased the criminality, the fact that he knows he can't be everywhere every time and how innocents might suffer because of that, and how he continues to push himself harder over and over again, yearning for his role as Batman to make a change in his city, only to see no results for 2 years, make him struggle to the point of affecting his mind, and making him look exhausted and tormented despite being so young. And all those struggles he faces inwardly, which can be tracked down to that tragic night when he lost his parents, are written all over his face as Bruce Wayne and are reflected through his methods as Batman. He is basically using the fear he has experienced as a kid with his parents' death and the fear those criminals are causing to the population of Gotham against them. All those things can be perfectly summed up when he says that he is vengeance. However, by the time the plot approaches its end, he realizes that his role is to inspire hope to the people of Gotham, which is completely different from what he had first envisioned. This closure was executed in such a beautiful way in the ending, when he saves the people who were trapped in the flood, and then when he carries one of the victims to the first responders. In those scenes, Batman is shown embracing that new role for the sake of what the people needed, and letting go of his vengeance role once he realizes that Batman being vengeance was what motivated the Riddler and his followers. The people who first feared him now trust Batman and let him guide them to safety amid the chaos. And the woman he was carrying reaches out to his arm with trust, and Batman answers to that faith placed on him by comforting her with reassurance and kindness in his eyes. And they manage to transmit such strong emotions of trust and hope, which are a groundbreaking moment for Batman in how he sees his role from now on, without saying a single word to each other. It was wonderful. What Bruce Wayne originally created for the purpose of fighting criminals through fear and brutality ended up becoming a sign of hope for the people, no longer in the shadows, but in broad daylight among the people he wants to protect. No longer transmitting fear, but hope, reassurance, and protection instead. And those scenes succeeded in conveying that transition and bringing a closure to his character arc in such a powerful way. Something that amazed me was the contrast between Bruce and Batman's behavior. Bruce is shown being silent and secluded, shutting himself off of the environment where he currently finds himself in. This was more noticeable than ever during the late mayor's memory service, how he seems like a ghost in his own body, almost as if he would let himself slowly fade away if he could. This is a huge contrast when he is Batman. All eyes gaze upon him whenever the Batman is around, and although he still remains mostly silent doing his own detective job, he possesses an unhampered boldness whenever he is wearing the mask. He knows that his presence is unwanted by many cops in the area, how they would kick him out at the crime scene if they could, but that doesn't affect his determination and continues to do what he has to, even if he is being stared and scorned at by almost everyone around him. And Robert Pattinson absolutely nailed that. But not just that, I also believe that Robert Pattinson did a great job at showing a more emotional side of Bruce Wayne's character as well. Despite being so naturally reclusive, we can still see the pain in his eyes. From Batman standing there, staring at the mayor's son after his father was murdered, to him staring at that kid again during his father's memory service as Bruce Wayne, sympathizing with that little boy for going through something like that at such a young age, while being reminded of that fear and sadness Bruce Wayne himself felt on the night his own parents were murdered 20 years ago. And once again where Bruce talks to Alfred at the hospital room about how this whole thing started making him fear losing someone he loves again, which is what truly terrifies him the most. Although it doesn't happen that often throughout the movie, we can see the way he feels one's pain. He is the kind of person who keeps those emotions to himself, but maybe it is precisely because he bears that pain silently that makes his suffering even more noticeable to the audience. And Robert Pattinson's acting flashes out this deeper aspect of Bruce's character, making him so relatable as a result. In fact, Robert Pattison succeeded at embodying all the awesome Batman stuff while also showing an emotional perspective of his character. He was incredible in all those aspects. He looks amazing in the suit, his fight scenes were great, and he looks so cool and intimidating while expressing the lonely, tormented side of Bruce Wayne altogether. and how all that is connected to his role as the Batman, making him so complex and sympathetic. Robert Pattinson was simply brilliant in all that, and of all things I loved about this movie, he is absolutely my favorite one. Paul Dano was extraordinary as the Riddler as well. Both Paul Dano's acting and the soundtrack worked amazingly well together into making the Riddler such a frightening villain, and the moments of the Riddler either attacking his victims or the outcome of his deeds is scarier and agonizing. The film also succeeds in unraveling the motivations throughout the movie. A man who suffered a lot for his whole life because the people responsible for taking care of the city were greedy and corrupt. However, the Riddler also works as a character who displays the duality of human nature. Both the Riddler and Batman are orphans. Both struggled with the death of their parents. Bruce wants to protect innocents by defeating the bad guys as Batman, whereas the Riddler wants to expose and punish the corrupt and greedy elite of Gotham. But while Bruce helps the city at the cost of tormenting himself in the process, the Riddler's actions end up making the innocent people suffer. From the mayor's son, who's just a little boy, to the rest of the population of Gotham when he causes a flood. And while this may sound pretty simplistic, like a black and white situation, the Riddler's tragic backstory gives us a whole new insight about him as an orphan kid and the harsh, dreadful reality of a neglected orphanage. From rats chewing his toes to babies freezing to death, whereas Bruce still had a home, support, the media sympathy, and money. All those factors and issues add tons of layers of gray into the matter, making it even more intricate and deeper. While we might still condemn his actions when it affects innocent people, it makes us understand how a life filled with sadness, injustice, and rage can make someone turn against the very society he has been forsaken by, and bring someone to do all that. Which is what will make Batman realize that his role of vengeance was what encouraged the Riddler to do everything he had done, unawarely contributing to Gotham City's doom. Once again, we're facing the duality of human nature here. Batman and the Riddler share the same scars and the same trauma, but the outcome of their choices are so different and yet so closely connected. This will make Batman realize what he needs to do next. If Batman's vengeance is what inspired the Riddler into taking action, then the Riddler's actions are what will make him abandon everything he had thought himself to be for the past 2 years of his life as Batman, and become something else that transcends all that in the end. Jeffrey Wright nailed his role as Detective Gordon, and their characters worked so great together in the movie. Zoey Kravitz was also fantastic as Catwoman, and I loved her dynamic and chemistry with Batman. I also think that this movie finds a perfect balance between their own respective goals throughout this film and the sexual tension between the two of them. Of course, this movie showed Selina as a sexy, beautiful character, not only while working at the Penguins Club, but also as a vigilante herself. But the movie didn't focus on that one aspect of her character. Yes, the sensuality is there whenever she is with Batman, but the movie focuses on her own personal goals and how they are somewhat interwoven with the Batman's goals instead. So I think that was a nice way to portray a sexy character without overshadowing all the other aspects of Selina to make her a great character in this film. Colin Farrell was amazing as the Penguin. His acting and the makeup were awesome. He also manages to make some funny moments without making this movie lose its dark tone or feel out of place altogether. When it comes to Andy Serkis, I think he did a great job with what he was given. It's clear that both Alfred and Bruce had their disagreements in this film. I've seen some people saying that they did not like it and that Alfred should have been portrayed more as a father figure in this film. But the reason why I wasn't bothered by this is because I think it's due to the fact that Bruce Wayne started being the Batman not that long ago and is still trying to figure out who he is. So I see those disagreements between the two of them as part of Bruce Wayne's journey to grow wiser and mature, and this will affect his bonds with Alfred as well. But regardless of all that, the care both Alfred and Bruce feel for each other is clearly there. Hence why I don't see issues with this kind of portrayal of Alfred. But I can't help myself but to wish that we could have seen more of him as Alfred in this movie though. The soundtrack of The Batman was excellent. I love the Batman theme, but I would like to give special attention to Nirvana's song Something in a Way. It was already played in the first trailer and it was cool, but I was actually surprised when we listened to that song again in the movie so soon. We were basically a few minutes into this movie when it starts playing, but when it does, the song fits the tone of the movie and the scene where it's being played so amazingly well. Same for when the song is played during his final monologue at the ending. The dark tone of the movie was fantastic, and this film also has some great, beautiful shots aesthetically speaking. And some action scenes simply kept me at the edge on my seat, and the fact that some of them actually had practical effects makes it even better. I was so invested in this film that most of this 3-hour-long movie passed by, and I hardly noticed due to how absorbed in the plot I was. The fight scenes were great as well. They look more realistic and brutal. They weren't the kind of fight scenes we usually see in MCU movies. In The Batman, it truly feels like you can feel the weight of each blow, and it was awesome. There were some issues in this film, however, those flaws did not tarnish this film for me in the slightest, especially when this film succeeds in other aspects so incredibly well. Matt Reeves, the cast, the soundtrack, everyone worked so well in making this movie an awesome film. It was totally worth the wait, and I can't wait to watch The Batman again.